I'm Tony Emmett anyhow. I'm the Chief Executive of ADAPT, and I've been there for about 4.5 years, but ADAPT's been going since about 2018.
And my name's Dennis DeRoos. I started with ADAPT about 18 months ago, and I do strategy and partnerships for the organisation. So supporting Tony and our board to think about how we achieve our organisation's purpose, which is fundamentally to create homes for people with intellectual disability.
And I think we started off with a couple of properties in Thames, which we brought to help the Supported Lifestyle Haraki Trust. But both of those properties are between 100 and 120 years old. Yeah, and probably since 2018 they've cost us over $400,000 in renovations and retrofitting. So I think what's changed with ADAPT is we were going to buy existing properties to support people with disabilities, and then the realisation there is what's out on the market is not the best way to look after people. So since then there's been a change of direction, and we decided that we would actually investigate what proper housing should be like for people with disabilities. So how to include universal design, accessibilities and link to community.
That's right. And so Tony and the team before I arrived developed our ADAPT housing model, which is called Inclusive Living. And that's all about thinking how you apply universal design to design homes that are fit for purpose for people with intellectual disability in the first instance, and also how you use design to help improve or create connection with community. So that's how we get the idea, how we bring alive the idea of inclusion. So we wanted to bring people with intellectual disability to the community, and the community to people with intellectual disability, so that we're driving for that integration.
So the pilot project that we're building for the concept is it's called Project Pairoa. We're building that for the provider, the Supported Lifestyle Haraki Trust, so we're building to support their model. So we've got a 6,200 square metre lot there. We're building what's going to be homes for 16 people, which is 12 one-bedroom units and 2 two-bedroom units. But we're also supporting that with a community hub, which will be used to support to house support staff, but also as a meeting place for the community. But each of those homes that we're talking about, they won't be built like units or anything else. Under each roof will be usually 4 one-bedroom units, but they're built to look like every other house in the subdivision. So the roof line, everything else is set out that they blend in completely. They've all got different colours. They all have different fences. Everything blends in with the surrounding neighbourhood, which will be built in this case at the same time in the subdivision.
And so this development and our housing model fulfills the need to provide people with choice. So as Tony said, there will be single units, so people will be able to live independently on their own without having to make the compromise of living with people they didn't necessarily choose to live with. All of the universal design principles that we're applying for this development will mean that they have a higher ability to be independent, to live safely and comfortably in their own home, and a place where they can really belong. So what we're trying to do is, through our housing model, is create that sense of belonging through good design, essentially. So they have the choice to be on their own, they have the choice to interact with others, to go into the hub, to be with other people, to participate in group activities, essentially. Or they have the choice, as I said, to be private and to be on their own so they choose when they want to interact with others.
Cross the road, go to the cafe, go to the bar, interact how they feel comfortable as their confidence sees fit. The New Zealand model's currently structured around cost efficiencies around group home environments. So you get between 3 and 5 people with a disability living together, not necessarily with a choice of who they live with. So a service provider will put people into a home and provide support around that. So you'll find that people go out in vans together, travel to do their groceries together. And it creates a bit of friction, as you naturally would if you were to pick 4 to 5 people off the street and say you're now living together. So this gets rid of that situation, and where I suppose we're trying to provide evidence that it can be done affordably and that it gives a much better lifestyle.
And what we also know is that by having people live in homes that weren't adapted or weren't created for them, originally designed for them, they need to be adapted, retrofitted with accessible design features. And so there are inherent compromises in that, not only for those individuals but also for the service providers that are trying to provide support for them in those homes. And the other problem is, of course, it's incredibly expensive. So if a service provider rents a home from the private market, it won't be adaptable, it won't be accessible, so they need to retrofit it. If they have a lease for 3 years, they need to maintain it, of course, and it's somebody else's asset. If the lease finishes, which it often does, then they need to put it back to the state they found it in. So there's all of this churn
Move to another home and do the same again.
Yeah, wasted money and repeat the process. So we want to demonstrate that there's efficiencies and that money that they save can go towards delivering more services for people that need them, essentially.
And the universal design too doesn't mean the accessible features that we're building in don't mean grab rails and everything standing out like a home that is built for someone with disability. Universal design's about a home that fits everybody, is modern, it's a home that we would love to live in, but has thoughtful design, enough space for turning circles, etc., and infrastructure in the walls that it can be adapted without any major retrofitting.
Yes, and that whole universal design idea is central to our concept and our philosophy. And one of the opportunities that we have is to begin to talk to more people, builders, developers, homeowners, about what universal design is, that it's not just accessibility. Universal design is all about creating attractive family homes that can adapt around you, a place where you can stay as you age, or if something happens, and you develop a disability or an impairment, you don't need to move.
Security of tenure, in this case for people with disabilities, because otherwise they quite often do have to move homes. Yeah, not ideal. And I mean, the brand research has come out. Dennis was talking about the cost of retrofitting. 2014 brands worked out that it was about 10 times the price to retrofit than to put in universal design features. So it's a substantial cost difference. Yes, it costs that little bit extra, but it saves you a lot of money in the long term. Very much along the super homes philosophy.
And what we know also is that in terms of the service providers who are having to rent homes from the market, up to 15% of their overheads go on managing those retrofits and maintaining those homes. So we think there are significant benefits of what we're trying to achieve.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, giving people that privacy, that freedom to live on their own, plus at the same time save the providers and the government a good share of money, we believe.
Not yet, really. There's the data around disability in New Zealand is not great in terms of understanding the broader population, probably even less so for people with intellectual disability, and nothing particularly in terms of, that I've found anyway, that looks at the benefit of design, good design, universal design, and how that can improve the outcomes, the individual outcomes or the well-being outcomes of people who live in those homes. Also, though, not just people with intellectual disability, but probably also with a broader population. So what actually are the tangible, all the well-being outcomes that derive from living in a universally designed home, a home that's warm, dry, just like everything that Super Homes is promoting as well. So we want to do some research around that as well, to see what benefits there are from people who are living in homes that were actually designed for them, that enable them to be independent and connected to community. And we'll share all of that information with Super Homes and anybody else in the market.
Is it a case of New Zealand being so far behind to Europe?
Unfortunately not. No, we're not behind. It's a worldwide issue with people with disabilities. Yep, there's obviously START and a bit of a groundswell about changing that. And the decision was made with ADAPT that New Zealand's a good place to be starting that because we're a bit more flexible, smaller. We can trial things that can't necessarily be trialled in older countries and countries that don't have the land that we have. So it gives us a bit of freedom to really investigate it properly and work out a very good model that we hope can be replicated not just in New Zealand but elsewhere. And you were talking about research, Dennis. I mean, the only housing research with disabilities for intellectual disabilities is probably the Data to Dignity work that IHC have done. But that's about the current environment, and we know that was there 48 different measures out there, and people with intellectual disabilities are behind in almost all of them. So health outcomes, mouldy, damp buildings, because the government funding for disability housing is included in their disability package. So there's nothing there to ensure that the standard of housing is appropriate.
Yeah, so we want to take that research to the next level and see how it works in a practical sense. So, and there is research of different housing models for different population groups, which do draw out the benefits of living in well-designed homes, but nothing yet for people with intellectual disability. So there's a real opportunity for us to create something in partnership with others that hopefully can inform in the broader sector and stimulate more development of homes, either our model or homes that are better designed to meet the needs of others.
Kind of process could actually be really interesting.
And we have quantity surveyors working with us on the pilot project,
Right,
so
of course
they
you
can
do.
identify
Yeah.
what the actual costs are of the additional features that are required to meet universal design standards and separate that out from the costs. So we should be able to quantify the costs.
Yeah, we can work on that going
Yeah.
forward. Just another thing to share with you.
Oh no, well
There's a-
we need to be able to demonstrate that
Yeah,
too,
yeah,
because
yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
we have two broad goals. One is we want to see the adoption of our inclusive living model, but we won't achieve that in every case. So the other goal is to make sure that there are more universally designed homes, or universal design principles are incorporated in new builds, so that people with intellectual disability, if they're not in service, ultimately, there will be more housing options for them.
Yeah.
So we're really keen to work on that.
When you have over 30% of your population has some form of disability or accessibility needs, and nearly 50% of people over the age of 65, yet we're building 3% of our homes with universal design, we have an issue. Every time we're building a home, we're creating a bigger problem.
Christchurch has had this amazing opportunity to redevelop itself, right? But how many homes, how many of the apartments that have been created in Christchurch have funded, basic accessibility design, let alone universal design. The universal design does not seem to have been incorporated, and there are major accessibility issues with some of the apartments and the townhouses that have been built. So as I'm thinking about where I'm going to finish my life, which hopefully will be in Christchurch, what options do I have to purchase homes that will support me as I age?
And the interesting thing is there are people out there now starting to test the market. There's one developer that has started, LifeMark have informed us of this, that have started building with lift shafts in their multi-storey buildings, and giving 10 people the option when they buy the units of whether they put the lift in or whether they leave it as a empty lift shaft for the future. And those plans are selling more rapidly than the balance of their plans. So there's obviously a need there, and they can make it commercially viable.
Well, there's lots of great typologies in Christchurch that you wouldn't necessarily find in places like Wellington. So, the construction of townhouses, 2 or 3 bedroom townhouses, the construction of medium density developments is great. I think that's where we need to be. The trick that's missing is too many of them are not accessible to a broad range of people. So that to me is the opportunity that is being missed. And if collectively Super Homes and ADAPT through our work together can promote the benefits and the affordability of universal design, anything we can do to turn that around is is great, right?
The other thing, living.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Just green spaces and places where people can transition from where their private space to public space. Yeah, I think that's a key thing that we're definitely building into inclusive living.
Yep.
I suppose we're fighting the building code to a certain degree. As the building code is set at such a low standard that builders, because everybody's looking for the best deal, people don't think about what could be additional. Builders don't think about adding features that will add value to people's worth and the property's worth over time. They're just looking at the lowest cost that they can put a product out in the market. So that's your, in the case of super homes, as you know, you increase power bills. Everything else is created because of the cutting corner by a low standard of our building code in New Zealand.
A high spec a high spec bathroom in a townhouse is no good if you can't access it, right?
So
And
did
they
the-
seem to be the things that people, builders and developers prioritise over accessibility.
Yeah.
But the reality too is we believe that if universal design is offered as a product that's on the market and people understand the benefit of it, there will be a market for it. So a lot of it is also awareness. And LifeMark are doing as good a job as they can at the moment, but getting their message out there. I mean, organisations like ADAPT, we're there to support them with that message.
The light is perfect. But yeah.
Have you spoken to Circle Living? So I'm going to forget the guy's name who's leading Circle Living. I can put you in touch with him. But they are creating co-living environments and developments. And so they are working up and down the country looking for land and talking with people who are interested in living in a co-living environment. And they did a development recently in Tākeka, and they're working in Christchurch, they're working in Wellington, and I looked at their Tākeka development and we talked about accessibility, and they're not currently factoring that in really, but they have a range of ages and stages living in their homes. That'd be worthwhile, I think, you perhaps reaching out to them and having to talk to them and talking to them about super homes, for example.
Yeah.
And
They're
particularly
really
the way they create
open-minded.
community.
Yeah, they really, and that's what they're trying to do, is
Yeah.
create a community of a range of people of ages and stages.
And the thing is, the demand for that sort of living environment, people want to live in a different way. So
They want to live in community, right? And they've had no shortage of finding people that are interested in living in
every
a
open
co-living
night has been
environment.
pretty much sold out.
Yeah.
Here in Christchurch.
Yes, we
That's
visited
nice.
there,
Yeah.
and they built 2 accessible units in there, which they've since retrofitted from the time they opened, because their understanding of accessibility was different to what actually worked. So they actually had to retrofit their designs, but
But
the
they
intention's
learned by
there.
doing it.
Oh, exactly.
That's right.
Yep. And the 2 people that live in those homes are supported by the neighbours. They check in if there's no movement, if anything's happened, they'll know first. Yeah, it's absolutely fantastic setup.
Free.
What I'd say, from my perspective, which is sort of helping adapt with strategy and developing partnerships, it's become really clear to me that nothing is going to happen unless we really do work in partnership with government, with housing providers, with designers, with developers, with people such as yourselves, because there is a lack of awareness about what universal design is, let alone accessibility, and we need to be developing a product where people intuitively understand that universal design is an attractive proposition, that it makes sense to build in that way. And at the moment, there seems to be a very low level of awareness about what that is and why it's important, or even that there's a market for these kinds of homes. It's not just cookie cutter homes that people are looking for in suburbs. People don't think about accessibility until they need it,
Yeah.
right? And
but
in
the-
many
but
ways, we're all one accident away from needing a universally designed or accessible home. And that's what people don't think about when they're designing a home or buying an existing home.
But yeah, the reality is that probably only about 1% of people that are disabled are actually in a wheelchair. So there's a lot of other types of disability, and the ADAPT model looks at most of those and trying to work on colour schemes for visual impaired people, place finding for people with dementia, adding all of that in so it's still really attractive and doesn't stand out at all different, but just that careful design from day one to make sure that anybody with any type of disability, and we all know that the amount of people on the autism spectrum and with ADHD is raising at such a great rate, we can actually build those features in day one as well.
Perfect.
What sort of things would you do for somebody with autism or ADHD? What kinds of things help with that?
Yeah, autism is colour schemes and
Okay.
that sort of stuff. Lighting, blackout curtains. Yeah, definitely dimmable lighting right throughout. Dimmable lights are very minimal cost, but it's something that makes every house wonderful for anybody with a disability or without. So a lot of universal design's about that. What works for somebody with a disability will work for everybody else.
Same with
Yeah,
all of
there's
that.
a crossover, and that crosses over as well with the green building, semi-movement, and what's the other? I'm trying to think of the other healthy. There's another standard beyond green building that's a global. I'll have to do a bit of research.
Passive house.
Yeah, it could well be, but actually, it's not even passive house. There's something else. I had an architect do a webinar on it. I'll do a bit of research.
There's several
It's about the
American-
plants up the sides of
Yeah,
walls
yeah,
and
yeah.
everything
green,
else. And
yes, green.
it's not. Yeah, it's not the New Zealand Green Home. It's
I'm not sure, but I know what you mean. Living walls essentially,
Yeah.
where you've got plants growing up the walls that create colour, environment. I mean, they're all clean airs, for example. But I mean, we don't green spaces and planting. We often don't think about that. I realise I think about where my parents live. They live in a pretty old school retirement complex. It's actually okay. It's quite pleasant because it's got lovely green spaces around it because it was designed probably or constructed 40 years ago. And there's a tree out the back, which is an old fruit tree, which has got a canopy, canopy growth over it. And in the summertime, they sit under there with their friends. There's shade. They sit under a tree and they have a glass of wine and they come together. You don't often see trees like that planted these days that encourage people to come together to sit outside. There's some shelter. There's nice dappled light. All of those things that we don't know about or aren't aware of these days.
part of the ADAPT philosophy through that privacy gradient is creating spaces of different sizes as well. So lots of smaller spaces where smaller groups can gather rather than creating always bigger spaces.
Yeah.
Yeah. So people have choices.
It's hard to achieve that when you're building lines of units down an old section, isn't it? So you've got a pathway or a driveway that where you can access the garages of those units, but there's no common space at all. There might be a strip at the back where you've got a small private deck, but that's not a great way to live. That's not a way to live in community.
Density of living, personally.
I guess there are other ways of designing that. If you think about creating public spaces or you're creating open spaces around that type of typology. So I guess there are ways to design environments that can connect people. But it's not incentivized. It's not encouraged, right? It's developing homes that maximise
The yield
on the land, exactly. And there aren't rules, there aren't regulations, there aren't building codes around that.
But yeah, I think there's a premium there if people were to create homes that do have that space and create the community. If everything's built around an outer boundary with beautiful common spaces, I think there's definitely a future in that model.
Yeah.